In the last video, we looked at how to create the risk matrix in the most awesome eQMS software on this planet in Formwork. But we also did it in the Google Sheets, in our simple risk analysis in the Google Sheets. And we saw it is also possible, but it's very painful. So that's why we used Formwork, also because it has a fancy feature where you have green and red cells in the risk matrix, and everything in your life becomes better once you use Formwork. Now, this is actually probably the most difficult to understand video. And if you've understood this for risk analysis, then you're pretty much done. You can kind of like, I don't know, shut your laptop and go outside and quit your job because you've understood everything there was to understand. So I'll walk you how to actually fill out something called the risk table, and in the most simple way possible, while still adhering to all the regulatory requirements. And it is like a bit involved, but I think it is quite possible with the knowledge which we've gained so far. So let's actually look at how that works in Formwork and what our simple Google Sheets risk table is missing again, unfortunately, which is why we can't use it. So in the past, we looked at this super nice risk matrix, and that's I didn't really change that. We also had this nice and simple spreadsheet risk table, which also looked kind of nice. And now the super interesting and I guess like quite challenging part is like, okay, we have to move all of this content, all the thoughts we put into this content, we have to move that into the Formwork risk table. And the Formwork risk table is still super intuitive, but it is also quite complex because it includes all the entities you need for ISO 14971 compliance, and we have already condensed it down to the subset with which you pass an audit in the most pragmatic way, because other consultants have other templates for this and they are super complex. So those are completely unnecessary. So let's create a new risk table entry here in Formwork. So now you can already see, hold on, I'm like confronted with all this stuff I've never heard of. Like you can see like hazardous situation, harm, we actually know harms, and we have all these probabilities in between and all sorts of optional stuff. So now we're kind of screwed. What do we do now? So the first thing we need to like define is actually we had defined a few severities here, but actually no harms so far. And because we're lacking all entries here and harm is the most easy one to define, let's start with the harms. So to define a harm, you navigate to the left side, you go to harms, nothing's here, create a new one. Okay, so now we have to define an actual medical harm. And in our scenario of the depression app, we already actually wrote down a few here. So we have something called worsening of depression. So let's do this. Actually, let's start with the not so bad ones, like someone gets stressed. Like let's call this acute stress reaction, okay? That's what I get when I'm confronted with regulatory compliance and auditors. Okay, and now is the cool thing here. Now we have to map that to a severity category, the ones we defined earlier, or actually the ones which Formwork auto created for us, which was cool. Okay, acute stress reaction, minor reversible damage, for sure. It's the most harmless severity category. Save that. And cool, check it out. Formwork added a nice arrow here. That's awesome. I like arrows. All right, next up, we have another one. We have worsening of depression. Let's actually say this is a reversible worsening of depression. And let's just assume for the sake of our app that maybe this is an irreversible worsening of depression. That being said, depression is a reversible disease. Okay, but let's just do this, okay? Reversible worsening of depression. And then map this. And then for the sake of this example, let's map it to category number 2. So it's minor damage with required medical intervention. And then we also do irreversible worsening of depression. Well, actually, you know what? That kind of sucks, because depression is I'm not a psychiatrist, but depression might always be reversible. So let's actually do worsening of depression with required medical intervention, okay? And then, oh yeah, we have to do a lot of stuff here. Let's map this to number 3 and we'll fix it later. Okay, I'll go and edit this. Oh, by the way, you can edit stuff by clicking on it and then click on the dots, edit. It's very intuitive. Okay, now here we have worsening of depression, and then without required medical intervention. And then now we actually have to fix these severity categories, because let's actually do let's just do like minor damage, like whatever that means. Okay, and then here we do minor damage without required medical intervention, and then here minor damage with required medical intervention. Let's call this insignificant. Okay, you can already see like how insignificant. You can already see like how hand wavy risk analysis is, and to that degree it is true, right? Because like we could be documenting 10,000 different risks, but we focused on like 20 or so. So we're already missing stuff, but we're trying our best here, right? And whether this passes doesn't depend on whether I'm doing a good job here. It depends on what personal preferences your auditor likely has. So the whole system is pretty broken, unfortunately. Okay, but now we adapted this, and I adapted these because now they map better to the harms, right? You see all of this has been updated. Formwork is magic. You can see acute stress reaction, insignificant damage, yep. Worsening of depression without required medical intervention, and the minor damage without intervention, yes. And then with required medical intervention, minor damage with. So, okay, so now the mapping works, and all of this makes a lot of sense. So that's cool. All right, we want to go back to the risk table, create a risk table entry. And now you can see magic. We can see the harms here. We can select a harm. However, we're still lacking hazards, and we're still lacking hazardous situations. So we still need to create those. And in that context, I can also explain what the hell those things are. And there are many very academic explanations. Let me just make it extremely simple, with kind of like screwing the entire definition of everything. Those are the last two things which happen before the harm. And that's the simplest, most easy to understand definition. You will see it in a bit. So let's just assume we want to document, what do we want to document this? The wrong medical content in the app. Okay. What are the last two things happening before the worsening of depression? So the last two things which happen, in my opinion, would be, man, this is testing my consulting skills here. I haven't done consulting in quite a while. The last two things would be essentially someone seeing the wrong medical content, someone believing that, and that leading to the worsening of depression, right? So for example, you have a smartphone app, depression app, and then you kind of like see like content which is blatantly super wrong medically, like and would be causing worsening of depression. For example, a patient reads like, depression is all your fault, you screwed up your life, and it's like you're lost, like this is hopeless. Okay, so this would be very dangerous, wrong medical content. And so if you kind of like assume that happens, the patient reads this, so there would be a few steps, but the patient would have to actually see this content in the app. Just because it's in the app doesn't mean everyone automatically has worsening of depression. No, the person has to see the actual text in the app, which might be hidden somewhere maybe, or in some menu. And then they actually have to believe it, right? So those are two steps, and in my opinion, those are the last two steps. This would be quite easy to argue in front of an auditor. So you already have your hazard and hazardous situation. So hazard would be like wrong text is displayed in the app, or let's call it wrong medical text. Here we can go into detail, but now we won't go into detail. We will skip all the optional stuff because we just want to understand how this thing works. And the hazardous situation would be like user believes wrong medical content in app. Okay, again, we could go into detail. We don't go into detail, but I would recommend you to explain this in more detail here, because it's always nice to have random explanations to show to auditors. Also, if you kind of like forgot what this was about. Okay, we created a hazard and a hazardous situation, and now let's finally, in the third attempt, try to do the risk table entry. Okay, now we can select the hazard here, which is awesome. Wrong medical text is displayed in the app. Hazard situation is user believes the wrong medical content in the app. And then I skip ahead a bit. The harm is, let's see, we have worsening of depression without required medical. Oh, we actually didn't define it here. Okay, let's just say it is worsening of depression without required intervention. Okay, now we just need two things, like how likely is one thing to lead to the other? Okay, so how likely is it that the patient, the user, sees this wrong medical text and then actually moves on to this next step that they believe the wrong medical text. Let's just assume, for the sake of this example, maybe it's 10%. Okay, so it's not 1, which would be 100%. It's 10 to the power of -1 or 0.1, which is 10%. So 90% of users, when they see super wrong text, they would be like, yeah, screw this. I think this is wrong. I'll ignore it. And that's, I think, a fair assumption to make. How do you come up with these numbers? In most cases, you just estimate them. There are all sorts of academic things in the standard, and they're like, yeah, you do literature research, published papers, studies. But yeah, is there a paper which has tested in a depression app how likely a patient is going to believe wrong medical text? I don't think you will find that sort of publication on this planet, on the internet right now. So unfortunately, most things you have to estimate yourself and just have some sort of rational argumentation around this. And I think this point can be made well, because I don't think 100% of people would believe completely wrong content like this. Okay, and then you need P2. What's the probability of the hazardous situation leading to the harm? Okay, so that would mean someone believes the wrong content in the app. How likely are they to have a worsening of depression? You could say maybe again 10%, but maybe actually 100%. I don't know. Let's stay conservative and make it 100%. So 100% of the people who see this wrong medical text, they have a worsening of their depression. That is at least our assumption. All right, can we save it? Can we save it? Yes. Okay. First entry in the risk table. Great success. All right. So if you've understood all of this so far, you're already better, in my opinion, than 90% of compliance people, because many compliance people, for example, can't handle probabilities, surprisingly. And you're probably better than 50% of auditors, because 50% of auditors, they also don't really have a rational understanding of these things. All right. To recap, and I think now the way Formwork displays this is also really, really neat, because it shows you kind of like a sequence of things. Like, okay, first you have wrong medical text, which is being displayed in the app. And then the user believes the wrong medical content. And the probability of this leading to this is 0.1, so 10%. And then you have worsening of depression without required medical intervention. And that's the probability of this leading to this is 100%. So the total probability of all of this stuff happening is 10%, right? Because you multiply these probabilities. You multiply 0.1 times 1, and that's 1. So you have the probability of 0.1. So if we head over to the risk matrix, what was 0.1? 0.1 is exactly in between these numbers. So it is category 1, probability category 1, called certain. Let's check this out. Yeah, Formwork has automatically looked this up in your risk matrix. So yeah, we have the mapping to the probability certain. And because we actually created this harm and mapped it to the severity category 2, minor damage without required medical intervention, we also see the severity category. So now we have probability 1, severity category 2. Let's look it up in the risk matrix. Probability 1, severity category 2. Is this acceptable according to our risk matrix? No, it is not. It's a red cell. I mean, we can always change it, but that's how it is right now. So, and yeah, Formwork actually looked it up for us, and that's amazing. Now I think now it slowly becomes clear how Formwork, the software, really, really helps you save time and actually make less mistakes while doing all of this, because doing this in the spreadsheet would become hell, right? You have to create all these columns, which is still doable, but then you have to do all these probability calculations, which is also doable, but then you have to look it up in this risk matrix and kind of like copy over all sorts of fields, and that's where things become really, really difficult. So we have all of this in Formwork, and I think that's amazing. So you even have these more detailed displays of the whole logic, which I think is super cool. And then you can see, no, it's not acceptable. It looked it up in the risk matrix. So that's cool. We got a really simple risk table entry done. And I think that's amazing. If you understood it so far, that's awesome. You're like way ahead of everyone else. And I'm not exaggerating by saying that. The regulatory compliance industry is not full of Nobel laureates. I think that's a fair statement to make. Okay, so what's your task? Your task now is play around with this risk table in Formwork. All of that is free, and that's pretty cool. You can just create a few entries based on the content you created in the crappy spreadsheet, and kind of like move it over into the Formwork structure, which consists of these hazards, hazardous situations, harms, and then you map all of them together in your risk table entries. That's pretty cool. In the next few videos, we'll be looking at all the other fields we actually skipped just now, all these optional fields and what role they play. They are kind of important, but not as important as the risk table, which we just saw. Like this was the main piece of, I guess, like the main piece of the problem which we had to solve. Everything else is kind of like just gravy on top, I guess. All right. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for the next videos in which we go into more detail about the risk analysis.